Hello and welcome back to my chess course, and in this section I'm going to teach you how to use rook activity. Rook activity is very important for rook endgames. Even if you are pawn down, you may win if your rook is active. There is a common rule which says that counter-attacking is better than defending. That's why most top players prefer to sacrifice a pawn and activate a rook, rather than just protect pawn weaknesses when they play rook endgames. If one of the sides has to passively defend, the game usually ends in a negative result for that side. Please don't forget about it, and if you have a chance to keep your rook active, don't neglect it. And now let's start with the puzzle. This position seems to be equal. Both sides have equal material. White is going to take a pawn on f3. What you should notice is that white rook on d7 is active. It cuts off black king and at the same time attacks on a7. Black rook should protect this pawn. Okay, your task is to find the winning plan for white. You may pause this video and think a little bit. It's easy to find the first move. You should take on f3, but which piece? The king or e-pawn? If there were queens on the board, I would recommend taking with e-pawn to keep pawn cover over the king. But in this position, nobody threats the king, and you'd better keep e-pawn as a passed pawn. You should play king takes on f3. The idea is to move your king to the queen side and attack black pawns a7, b6 and c5. Black plays rook a8. Black will definitely lose the game if he allows white to take on a7 and make another passed pawn. King e4, king h7, king d5, king g6, king c6, rook e8. Black is forced to sacrifice a pawn. He wants to exchange it for e-pawn. Rook takes on a7. Rook takes e2. Rook d7. Rook takes on h2. King b7. And black has to resign because he loses a rook. For example, rook a2, a7, and the next move will be a8, queen. What you should learn from this puzzle is that if your rook is active and your opponent's rook should protect his pawn weaknesses, you can improve your king's position and win the game. Thank you for your attention. We will continue in the next lecture. Welcome back to my chess course, and this position is from the game between Znosko and Alekhine, which was played in Paris in 1933. It's a difficult endgame which seems to be approximately equal, but black has multi-stage plan. First, to trade a pair of rooks. Second, to move the king to e6, where it will be covered by the pawn and it can control d7 square, preventing white rook to occupy the 7th rank. Put the rook to g file and advance h-pawn, opening h-file. Thus, white king will be tied down to h1 and h2 squares. Open one of the files, advancing a and b pawns. White king at the same time will be on the king side and can't prevent black rook invasion. However, it's white to move. He plays bishop h6, attacking the rook. Rook f2 d8. King f1. f4 was correct, destroying black center. King f1, f5. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook. g3, protecting from f4. King f7. Bishop e3. h5, king to e2, king e6, rook d1, rook g8. 3 stages passed. h4 is a bad move because of rook g4 and f4. So f3, h4, attacking the pawn on g3. Bishop f2, defending the pawn. H takes on g3, h takes on g3, rook h8. Black moves his rook to an open file. He is going to play rook h2. Bishop g1, defending h2 square. Bishop d6. King f1. Rook g8, attacking the pawn. Bishop f2. The first weakness is formed, it's g3. b5. If white just stays put, c5, c4, a5 and b4 will follow. So he plays b3 in this position. a5, king to g2, a4, rook d2. If b4, then rook from g8 to a8, a6 and c6, attacking the pawn on c3. So rook d2, a takes b3, a takes b3, rook a8. The plan is done, but the fight is not over. c4, rook a3, attacking the pawn on b3. If white takes the pawn, then rook takes on b3, and then black wins the pawn on b5. c5, attacking the bishop. Bishop e7. Rook b2, protecting the pawn. b4. g4, looking for a counterplay, but f4. King f1. Rook a1 check. King e2. Rook c1, attacking the pawn on c5. Rook a2. White has no means to defend the pawn on c5. Rook c3, attacking the pawn on b3. Rook a7. c7 pawn is hanging. That's why king goes to d7. Rook b7. Now b4 is hanging. But black plays rook takes on b3, protecting the pawn. Rook b8. Rook b2 check. King f1. b3. King g1. King to c6. King f1. King d5. Rook b7. e4. Active play by Alekhine to realize his advantage. F takes on e4, check. King has to take. Rook takes on c7, attacking the bishop. But king to f3. White bishop is also hanging. Rook takes on e7. Rook takes on f2, check. King e1, b2. The pawn is going to be promoted. Rook b7. Rook c2. Black is going to play rook c1 check and b1 queen. c6. Now this plan doesn't work. For example, rook c1, king to d2, b1 queen, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, and c7. And in this position, black can't stop the pawn. He can't play rook c1 because of the king on d2. That's why after c6 he plays king to g3. Now he wants to promote another pawn. c7, f3. King d1 attacking the rook. Rook takes on c7. Now if rook takes rook, then b1 queen. So rook takes on b2. But then f2, and white resigned, because he has to sacrifice his rook to a pawn. If, for example, king e2, then rook e7 check, king f1, and rook e1 checkmate. Thank you for your attention. Hello and welcome to my chess course, and this lecture is devoted to perpetual check. Perpetual check is the defender's most important weapon in the fight for a draw, but it may not be easy to decide whether a series of checks can be continued indefinitely. Sometimes the attacker can escape the checks by subtle maneuvers. Let's look at this position. White played queen d8 check, king b7, queen d7 check, king a8, queen c6, king b8. Although this does not yet throw away the win, it shows that black has not spotted the key idea. The quickest route to victory was king a7, queen d7 check, king a6, queen c8, and now queen b7. If king a5, it's a mistake, because once white is allowed to start checking from the 8th rank, the position is a draw. Queen a8, king b5, queen e8 check, king b6, queen b8 check, king c6, queen c8 check, king d5, queen d8 check, king e5, queen h8, and black cannot escape from the checks. That's why it's important to play queen b7 here. Queen e6 check, queen b6, queen a2. If queen c8, then king a5, queen a8 check, queen a6, queen b8, queen b5, queen a8, king b4, queen e4 check, king c3, queen e5 check, king c2. And there are no good checks. On the next move, black promotes a queen. If, for example, queen c4 check in this position, then king b7, queen d5 transposes to the main line. Let me show you. So queen a2 in this position, king b7, queen d5. If, for example, queen b1 in this position, then black plays queen f6, and black wins easily, as his queen soon reaches c1 square. Also, please notice that queen f7 here is impossible because of queen c7. Interposition with check is one of the most common methods of halting a series of checks. Let's go back. King b7, queen d5, king c8, strong move, queen g8. If, for example, queen f5 check, then king goes to b8, queen f8, king b7, queen f3, king a6, queen a8, queen a7, king c6, queen a5, and there are no more checks. That's why queen g8 is better than queen f5. Queen d8, queen a2, still attacking the passed pawn. If, for example, queen b3, then queen h4 check, king g2, and queen b4. It's a winning position for black, and I will show you how to win a little bit later. So queen a2 attacking the b pawn, queen h4 check. If, for example, king g1, then queen e1, and then black promotes the pawn. So king g2 is the only move. Queen b4. The queen returns to its original square, but with the crucial difference that the white king is now on g2 rather than h2. which allows black to interpose on b7 with check. Let me show you. Queen g8, check, king b7, queen d5, king b6, queen d8, check, king a7. Now the checks have come to an end and black wins. For example, if queen d7, queen b7, check, and white is forced to trade queens. So black should win in this position, but let me show you what happened in this game. Queen d6, check, king b7, queen d7, check, king b6, king a6 was quicker. However, it was played king b6, queen d8, check, and black played king to c6. This move definitely throws away the win, as now white can start checking along the 8 rank. The correct move was king b7, queen d7, and king a6. Let's go back. So black played king to c8. Black played king to c6. Queen c8 draws the game, but in the game it was played queen e8, check, king b7. If, for example, king d5, queen d8 leads to a draw. So in the game it was king b7, queen d7, and the players agreed to a draw even though the position is winning for black. What I want you to learn from this lecture is that you should find a plan how to escape from checks. And every time when you make a move with your king, try to think about the idea to make interposition with check, using your own queen. Thank you for your attention. Hello and welcome back to my chess course, and this section will be devoted to bishop endgames. And in this lecture I will describe you how to play with a good bishop versus bad one. Look at this position. White has 2 pawns fixed on dark squares, which is enough to cost him the game. It's black to move. Please pause this video and think about black's plan. Okay, we continue. Black plays king to d7, a typical idea. Black cannot penetrate on the king side, so he plans to widen the front by playing his king to b5 and then advancing a5, a4. This will open a path into white's position via the queen side. This position is from the game between Van Velde and Kramnik. Kramnik was playing for black, and he realized that he can still win even if he trades a pawn. I mean, 2 pawns will be enough to win the position. King e2, king c6, king d3, king b5, king c2, a5, king d3, a4, trading pawns, b takes on a4, king takes on a4. Bishop f2. If king goes to c2, then black king gets in by king a3. Bishop f2, king b4. King d3, king b3. So bishop f2 immediately. King b3. Bishop e1. King b2. Bishop f2, king c1. Bishop e3, check. If king e2, then king c2. And after this check, black plays king d1. Bishop goes back to f2. If bishop f4, then bishop b4 would be played. Bishop a3. King e3. Bishop c1, check. King d3. Bishop d2. Bishop e3. If black trades bishop, it will be a draw. That's why bishop e1. Bishop f4, defending the pawn on g3. Bishop f2. Bishop e5, king e1. The black king has come a long way over the past 16 moves, but he has penetrated to the very heart of white's position. King c3, king e2, king b4, king f3, king c5, king e4. And white is in Zugzwang. If he plays with the bishop, then he loses one of these pawns. If he plays with his king, he loses on d4. White resigned in this position. From this lecture, I want you to remember that you should place your pawns on the square of opposite color than the enemy bishop is. For example, in this position, when you're playing against dark square bishop, you should place your pawns on light squares, like this. This pawn also can be moved to a6. And another thing that you should learn is that... Thank you for your attention. We will continue in the next lecture.